The CEO boss stopped the elevator and said, "You don't have to pretend anymore." Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The flashbulbs were a familiar kind of torture, a staccato assault of white-hot light that made the smile on Alara Sterling's face feel as though it were carved from ice. She stood beside her husband, Marcus, her fingers a cold knot in the crook of his arm, the weight of his hand a constant, proprietary pressure. To the world, they were the perfect couple. Marcus Sterling, the real estate magnate with a politician's smile, and Alara, his beautiful, elegant wife, a silent testament to his success. The cameras loved them, devoured the image of polished harmony they presented, never seeing the fine-grained cracks beneath the veneer. But tonight, someone was looking past the performance. Across the opulent ballroom, through the swirl of designer gowns and the clinking of champagne flutes, a man stood watching her, and his gaze was nothing like the adoring, empty stare of the public. It was dark, analytical, and unsettlingly direct, as if he could see the meticulously constructed fortress around her heart and was simply calculating the best way to tear it down. His name was Dante Volkov, and his presence changed the very atmosphere of a room. He was the CEO of Volkov Enterprises, a global logistics empire that had devoured its competition with unnerving speed and precision. But the whispers that followed him were not just of corporate takeovers. They spoke of an older, deeper power, of a world that operated in the shadows where loyalty was currency and blood was the only binding contract. He moved with a predator's grace, his tailored suit unable to conceal the raw power coiled in his frame. And as his eyes, the color of storm-darkened sea, remained fixed on hers, Alara felt a tremor of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Fear, yes, but tangled with a dangerous, forbidden curiosity. He was not looking at Mrs. Sterling, the socialite. He was looking at Alara, the prisoner, and he seemed to know the difference. Marcus, oblivious, tightened his grip on her arm, his thumb digging into the sensitive flesh of her bicep. "Smile, darling," he murmured, the words a silken threat against her ear. "Mr. Tanaka is watching. We need his support for the waterfront project." She obeyed instantly, the muscles in her face contracting into the familiar, bright shape of contentment. It was a reflex honed by years of practice. But the effort was monumental tonight, because Dante Volkov was still watching, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed his features as he saw Marcus's subtle act of control. He saw it. The realization struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. In this entire room of people looking at her, he was the only one who was actually seeing her. Later, as Marcus networked with a cluster of investors, Alara found herself momentarily adrift near the terrace doors, the cool night air a welcome reprieve. It was then that Dante materialized beside her, moving with a silence that was startling for a man of his size. He did not offer a trite pleasantry or a practiced compliment. Instead, he held out a glass. "You look like you need this more than they do," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floor. It was whiskey, not champagne, its amber depths a stark contrast to the pale, bubbly falsehoods being passed around the room. She hesitated, her programming screaming at her not to accept, not to engage. It was a deviation from the script Marcus had written for her. "Thank you, Mr. Volkov, but my husband," she began, the polite refusal automatic on her lips. He did not retract the glass. His eyes held hers, and for a terrifying second she felt stripped bare. "I know who your husband is," he said, the words carrying a weight she couldn't decipher. "I'm not talking to him." His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second to her hand, where her wedding ring, a diamond so large it felt more like a shackle, caught the light. When he looked up, his expression was grim. Slowly, her fingers uncurled, and she took the glass. The heat of his skin brushed against hers, a spark of contact so brief, and yet so potent it made her breath catch. The whiskey was smooth and fiery, a welcome burn that momentarily scorched away the chill of her reality. Their silent communion was shattered by Marcus's return. His smile was still firmly in place for the public, but his eyes were chips of ice as they landed on Dante, then on the glass in Alara's hand. "Volkov," he said, his tone a carefully calibrated mix of bonhomie and warning. "I didn't realize you and my wife were acquainted." Dante turned to face him, his posture relaxed but radiating an aura of absolute command that made Marcus seem like a petulant boy in comparison. "We were just discussing the importance of authenticity," Dante replied, his voice dangerously smooth. "A rare commodity these days." The veiled insult hung in the air, a challenge Marcus was smart enough not to accept directly. Instead, he wrapped his arm around Alara's waist, pulling her flush against his side in a gesture of ownership. "My Alara is the most genuine person I know," he said, his smile never wavering. He took the whiskey glass from her unresisting fingers and placed it on a passing tray. "But she prefers champagne." The lie was effortless, another brick in the wall of their public life. Dante's gaze met Alara's over Marcus's shoulder, and in that moment she saw not pity but a dark, simmering promise. He knew, and he was not going to let it go. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow conversations, but the silent, intense presence of Dante Volkov was a brand on her consciousness. She could feel his eyes on her, a constant, unnerving pressure that was both a threat and, to her profound shame and terror, a lifeline. The next day, the illusion of normalcy was aggressively reestablished. Marcus had business at the Volkov Enterprises Tower, a meeting he insisted Alara attend. "It's about image, darling," he'd said, straightening his tie as she applied concealer to the faint, finger-shaped bruise on her arm from the previous night. "A united front. It shows stability." In reality, she knew it was about control. He could not bear to let her out of his sight, especially not after her brief, charged interaction with a man like Dante Volkov. The Volkov Tower was a monument of smoked glass and black steel that pierced the city's skyline, a declaration of its owner's dominance. The lobby was a cavern of marble and quiet efficiency, and as they were escorted to the executive floors, Alara felt a growing sense of dread. This was his territory, his kingdom. They were lambs walking into the lion's den. Only Marcus was too arrogant to realize he was not the predator here. The meeting was a tense affair, a dance of corporate power plays and thinly veiled animosity. Marcus, used to being the most powerful man in any room, was visibly off balance under Dante's cool, impassive scrutiny. Dante dismantled Marcus's proposals with surgical precision, his questions sharp and his insights cutting, leaving Marcus floundering. Alara sat silently by the side, a perfect statue, her hands clasped in her lap. She kept her eyes downcast, but she could feel Dante's awareness of her, a magnetic pull she fought to resist. When the meeting finally, mercifully, concluded, Marcus stood abruptly, his face a mask of barely suppressed fury. "We'll be in touch," he bit out, before turning and stalking from the conference room without a backward glance for his wife. Alara rose to follow, her movements stiff. She reached the hallway just as an elevator arrived, its doors sliding open with a soft chime. Marcus was already gone, having taken the first one. She stepped into the empty car, a wave of relief washing over her at the thought of a few moments of solitude. Just as the doors began to close, a hand shot out, stopping them. Dante Volkov stepped inside, and the small space was suddenly charged with an electric tension. The doors slid shut, encasing them in a box of brushed steel and golden, ambient light. He didn't press a button. Instead, he hit the small, red emergency stop switch. The elevator jolted to a halt, the sudden silence deafening. They were trapped, suspended between floors, alone. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings against a cage. She stared at the control panel, at his hand resting near the button, his long fingers steady and sure. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the clean, sharp scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him, something dark and masculine. She forced herself to look at him, her chin lifting in a defiant gesture that felt laughably weak. His expression was not threatening, but it was intense, his eyes searching hers, peeling back the layers of her composure. "He left you," Dante stated, his voice a low rumble in the quiet car. It wasn't a question. "He was in a hurry," she replied, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He took a half step closer, and she had to fight the instinct to shrink back. The space between them was now almost non-existent. He lifted his other hand, not to touch her face, but her hand, the one that rested on the cool steel of the railing. His touch was shockingly gentle as he brushed his thumb over her knuckles, his gaze dropping to the heavy diamond on her finger. The ring caught the golden light, glinting like a cold, beautiful tear. She flinched, but he did not release her. His grip was firm, yet it was nothing like Marcus's bruising possession. It was grounding, anchoring. "That ring," he said softly, his eyes lifting to meet hers again, "is the only thing about you that's a lie." Her breath hitched. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," he countered, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a conspiratorial whisper that was for her alone. He leaned in, his presence overwhelming her senses. He wasn't touching her anywhere else, but she felt surrounded by him, by his power, his focus. She could see the flecks of gray in his dark eyes, the faint scar that cut through one of his eyebrows. He saw the tremor in her hand, the slight widening of her pupils, the frantic pulse beating in the hollow of her throat. He saw everything. And then he said the words that shattered her world. "You don't have to pretend anymore, Alara." He said her name, and it was a revelation. To Marcus, she was darling or my wife. To the world, she was Mrs. Sterling. But this man, this dangerous, powerful stranger, called her by her name as if he had a right to it, as if he knew the woman who had been buried beneath the titles for so long. The carefully constructed dam inside her cracked. Tears pricked at the backs of her eyes, hot and sharp with years of unshed grief and rage. She fought them back, refusing to break, not here, not in front of him. But he saw the battle raging within her. "He hurts you," Dante continued, his voice a blade, sharp and clean. "He thinks no one sees. He's wrong. I see. I see the fear you hide behind that perfect smile. I see the way you hold yourself, like you're waiting for the next blow, even if it's just a word. I saw the bruise on your arm last night, the one your makeup doesn't quite cover." The dam broke. A single, traitorous tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cold cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He simply watched it fall, his expression hardening into something cold and lethal, an anger that was not directed at her, but for her. He was angry on her behalf, and the sheer novelty of that emotion, of someone else's protective fury, was more overwhelming than his proximity. "You don't know anything," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I know that a woman like you is not meant for a cage, no matter how gilded," he said. He finally released her hand, but the warmth of his touch lingered. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim, featureless black phone, holding it out to her. "This is a direct line to me. No trackers, no records. When you decide you are finished pretending, you use it. One call. That's all it will take." She stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. Taking it was an act of treason. It was a step off a cliff into a world she couldn't begin to imagine. But not taking it meant remaining in the hell she knew, a hell that was slowly, methodically erasing her. With a hand that shook so violently she was surprised she could control it, Alara took the phone. Its cool, smooth weight was solid in her palm, a tangible piece of a different future. It felt heavier than any decision she had ever made. He watched her tuck it into her purse, his eyes dark and satisfied. Without another word, he reached over and pressed the button to restart the elevator. The car hummed back to life and began its smooth descent. The spell was broken. They stood in silence for the remaining floors, the air thick with unspoken words and the seismic shift that had just occurred. When the doors opened to the lobby, he stepped back, giving her space. "Have a good day, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice back to its formal, detached tone, the name a deliberate, mocking echo of their conversation. She walked out of the elevator and through the marble lobby on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The small, black phone in her purse, a cold, heavy promise of either salvation or ruin. The drive home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Marcus sat in the back of the town car, radiating a palpable fury that was far more terrifying than any overt outburst. He didn't speak, didn't look at her, but Alara could feel the storm gathering. The air grew thick and heavy with his resentment over the failed meeting, over the perceived slight from Dante Volkov, and she suspected, over the simple fact of her existence in that man's presence. The house, usually a sanctuary of cold, minimalist perfection, felt like a tomb when they arrived. The heavy front door clicked shut behind them, and the sound echoed like a death knell. In the stark, white foyer, Marcus finally turned on her. His movements were deceptively calm as he removed his jacket and handed it to the waiting housekeeper without a word, dismissing her with a flick of his wrist. When they were alone, his composure shattered. "What did he say to you?" he demanded, his voice a low, vicious snarl. He advanced on her, backing her against the cold marble of a console table. "In the elevator. What did you and Volkov talk about?" "Nothing," Alara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We didn't talk. He just got on at the executive floor and we rode down together." Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a wild drumbeat of fear. The burner phone in her purse felt like it was burning a hole through the leather, a tangible piece of evidence of her betrayal. She prayed he couldn't see the lie in her eyes, the terror that was clawing at her throat. "Don't lie to me," he hissed, his face inches from hers. His hand shot out and clamped around her jaw, his fingers digging into her skin, forcing her to meet his enraged gaze. "A man like that doesn't do anything without a reason. He looked at you all night. I saw it. And then you just happened to be alone with him. Do you think I'm a fool?" The pressure on her jaw was immense, a grinding pain that made stars burst behind her eyes. She remained silent, knowing that any word, any protest would only fuel his rage. His cruelty was a fire that fed on her reactions. Silence was her only shield, however thin. He saw the defiance in her stillness, and it enraged him further. He released her jaw with a shove that sent her stumbling back, her hip catching the sharp corner of the table. A cry of pain escaped her lips before she could stop it. "You are mine, Alara," he spat, his voice trembling with a possessive fury that was far more intimate than any act of love he had ever shown her. "You belong to me. Your name, your body, your reputation, it is all a reflection of me, and you will not tarnish it by entertaining the attention of brutes like Dante Volkov. Do you understand?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, trembling, the ache in her jaw and the blooming pain in her hip a fresh reminder of the bars of her cage. That night, she lay awake in their cold, silent bedroom, listening to the sound of his even breathing beside her. It was the sound of her prison guard, fast asleep. The house was dark, the world outside a distant, muffled hum. Reaching into her purse on the nightstand, her fingers closed around the smooth, cold plastic of the burner phone. It felt like a sin, a hope, a weapon. For 2 days, the phone remained hidden at the bottom of her jewelry box, a silent, potent secret. Life with Marcus continued its tense, predictable rhythm. He was icily polite to her in front of the staff, his every word a thinly veiled reminder of her transgression. He controlled her calls, monitored her emails, and insisted she accompany him everywhere, his presence a constant, suffocating blanket. The bruise on her hip had blossomed into a dark, ugly purple, a secret she carried under her designer clothes. It was on the 3rd night that he pushed her too far. He had been drinking, a rare indulgence for him as he prized control above all else, but the Volkov deal had unnerved him, and he was taking his frustration out on the only person he could. He was belittling her over a minor detail, the flower arrangements for an upcoming charity dinner she was hosting. His words were precise, cruel, designed to chip away at her self-worth, to remind her that she was nothing more than an accessory he had acquired. "Incompetent," he slurred, slamming his crystal tumbler down on the granite countertop of the kitchen island. "Even this one simple thing is beyond you. What do I even keep you for?" The question hung in the air, raw and ugly. She had heard variations of it before, but tonight, colored by the memory of Dante's words, "A woman like you was not meant for a cage," it landed differently. It wasn't just an insult, it was a verdict. This was her life, her purpose, to be a beautiful, useless object and to fail even at that. Something inside her, something that had been dormant for years, finally snapped. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply turned and walked out of the kitchen, her movements calm and deliberate. He shouted after her, but she didn't stop. She went upstairs to their bedroom, locked the door, and took the phone from its hiding place. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was icily clear. She pressed the single button on the side, and the screen lit up. There was only one contact, one number. Dante. She pressed the call button before she could lose her nerve. It rang only once before he answered. There was no greeting, no hello. Just his voice, that same low, resonant baritone, but this time it was laced with an expectant tension. "Ilara." Hearing him say her name again sent a shiver through her, but this time it was one of relief. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking. There was a pause on the other end, but it was not a hesitation. It was the sound of a decision being made, of a complex machine being set into motion. Where are you? He asked, his tone all business now, sharp and focused. Home, in my bedroom. Is he there? Downstairs. Stay on the line. Do not hang up, he commanded. Walk to your window. Is there a black sedan parked across the street, 2 houses down? She moved to the large window that overlooked the manicured street. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was there just as he said, a sleek, dark car, almost invisible in the shadows, its presence both ominous and reassuring. Yes, she breathed. Good, he's been there since you left my office, Dante said, the statement so matter-of-fact it stole her breath. He had been watching her, protecting her. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I need you to listen to me very carefully. My men are 2 minutes away. They will not come to the front door. Go to the guest suite at the back of the east wing. The lock on the French door to the balcony is a standard quickset. They can bypass it in less than 10 seconds. Can you get there without him seeing you? She thought of the layout of the house, the path she would have to take. Yes, he's in the kitchen. He'll assume I'm sulking. Good girl, he murmured, the praise sending a strange warmth through her. Go now, leave everything behind. Your purse, your phone, all of it, just walk out. I will handle the rest. The line went silent, but he hadn't hung up. He was waiting. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Alara put the burner phone on the bed. She unlocked her bedroom door and slipped into the hallway, a ghost in her own home. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. She could hear the faint sound of the television from downstairs. Marcus had moved on. She reached the guest suite, her hand closing over the cold brass of the doorknob. She slipped inside, locking it behind her, and moved to the French doors. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the perfectly landscaped gardens. And then she saw them. 2 figures, dressed in black, moving with a fluid, silent grace across the lawn. They were at the base of the balcony in seconds. One of them looked up, and even in the darkness, she could feel the intensity of his professional gaze. He gave a slight nod. This was it, the precipice. A life of predictable misery behind her and a future of terrifying uncertainty ahead. But it would be a future of her own. She stood by the door and waited. The sound of the lock being picked was almost imperceptible, a series of soft, metallic clicks. Then the door swung open. A man stepped inside. He was built like a mountain, his face impassive. Mrs. Sterling, he said, his voice a low growl. We need to go, now. She nodded, stepping out onto the balcony into the cool night air. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. The descent was quick and professional, and then she was being hustled across the lawn into the back of a waiting car. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the house, a glowing, modernist prison. It was the last time she would ever see it. The man in the passenger seat handed her a phone. It was already ringing. She answered it. You're safe, Dante's voice said, and the simple finality of it made her close her eyes. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. Now, he said, a hint of something dark and possessive in his tone. Marcus Sterling learns what it means to take something that belongs to me. The vehicle that carried her away from her old life was an island of silent, insulated luxury. It moved through the city streets with an unhurried confidence, the tinted windows transforming the familiar landscape into a distant, muted film. Alara sat back against the supple leather, the adrenaline that had fueled her escape slowly ebbing away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. She was free of Marcus, but she had thrown herself into the hands of a man who was, by all accounts, infinitely more dangerous. The paradox of her situation was not lost on her. She had fled a gilded cage only to willingly enter the den of a lion. Yet, for the first time in a decade, the fear she felt was not the corrosive, soul-dulling terror of powerlessness. It was a sharp, vital thrill, the fear of the unknown, of a life that was suddenly, violently her own. They drove for nearly an hour, leaving the city behind and ascending into the hills that overlooked the sprawling metropolis. The car finally turned into a long, private driveway, passing through a set of imposing iron gates that swung open without a sound. At the end of the drive was not a fortress, but a stunning piece of architecture, a house of glass and dark wood cantilevered over the hillside, seemingly suspended in the night air. Lights glowed from within, warm and inviting. This was not a hideout. It was a home, Dante's home. He was waiting for her on the front steps, silhouetted against the light pouring from the open door. He wore no jacket, just a simple dark shirt and trousers, the casual attire somehow making him seem even more formidable. As she stepped out of the car, his eyes met hers, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. He dismissed his men with a curt nod, and they vanished as silently as they had appeared. He did not rush to her, did not crowd her. He simply watched her approach, his expression unreadable but his focus absolute. "Welcome, Alara," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She stopped a few feet from him, wrapping her arms around herself, a subconscious gesture of self-protection. "What will he do?" she asked, the question that had been tormenting her for the entire drive. "Marcus." "When he finds me gone." Dante's mouth curved into a faint, chilling smile. "He will do nothing," he said, "because by morning Marcus Sterling will have far more pressing concerns than his runaway wife. His assets are being frozen as we speak. His partners are being presented with irrefutable evidence of his fraud. The foundation of his empire, the one he built on lies and intimidation, is crumbling. By the time the sun rises, he will be a ruined man." The sheer scale and speed of his retribution was breathtaking. This was not a simple act of revenge. It was the systematic, ruthless annihilation of a man's entire world. And he had done it for her. The thought was staggering. "How?" she whispered. He stepped closer, finally bridging the distance between them. He gently took her arms and unwrapped them from around her body, holding her hands in his. His touch was warm and steady, a stark contrast to the cold, bruising grip she was used to. Marcus believed his power came from money and political influence, Dante explained, his eyes never leaving hers. "But true power is not about what you own. It is about what you know, and I make it my business to know everything about my enemies. The moment he laid a hand on you at that gala, he became my enemy." He led her inside. The interior of the house was as stunning as the exterior, with clean lines, rich textures, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. It was masculine and elegant, a space that spoke of immense wealth, but also of impeccable taste. There was a fire crackling in a large, modern fireplace, casting a warm, flickering glow over the room. He led her to a plush sofa that faced the view and sat beside her, leaving a respectable distance between them, yet the air was thick with a palpable intimacy. "You are safe here," he said. "No one can reach you. You can rest." But rest was the furthest thing from her mind. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was racing, trying to process the cataclysmic shift in her reality. She looked at this man, this architect of her liberation, and saw the immense, dangerous power he wielded so effortlessly. "Why?" she asked, the question raw and vulnerable. "Why would you do all of this for me? You barely know me." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. When he finally turned to her, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because when I look at you, I do not see the frightened woman your husband tried to create," he said, his voice a low, gravelly timbre. "I see a queen who was forced to kneel. I see a fire that has been banked but never extinguished. I recognized you because I am the same. My entire life has been a fight to carve out my own kingdom, to refuse to bow to men who believe they are entitled to power. You, Alara, are not a victim. You are a survivor, and I do not tolerate seeing what is precious to me being mishandled." His words struck a chord deep within her, resonating with a truth she had long forgotten about herself. He didn't see her as a broken thing to be fixed or a damsel to be rescued. He saw her as an equal, a fellow sovereign whose crown had been temporarily misplaced. In that moment, the last of her fear of him dissolved, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of connection. He understood her in a way no one, not even she herself, had in years. She had spent a decade shrinking, making herself smaller to fit into Marcus's world. But Dante was not asking her to be small. He was challenging her to be magnificent. He stood and walked to a wet bar in the corner of the room, pouring 2 glasses of the same amber whiskey he had offered her at the gala. He returned and handed one to her, their fingers brushing. This time she did not pull away. The warmth spread from his touch through her entire body. They drank in a comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the city glowing below them. The quiet was not empty. It was filled with everything that had not yet been said, with the promise of a new beginning. As the hours passed, he spoke of his own life, not in a deluge of confession, but in brief, telling anecdotes. He spoke of his family, of the brutal world he had been born into, and the empire he had built, both legitimate and otherwise. He spoke of loyalty as the only virtue that mattered, and betrayal as the only unforgivable sin. He was laying his world at her feet, showing her the darkness and the danger without apology, but also showing her the unshakable code of honor that governed it. He was offering her a sanctuary, but he was also offering her a choice. "When this is over," he said, his voice serious as he stared out at the city, "Marcus will be gone. The threat will be neutralized permanently. You will be free. I have resources, connections all over the world. I can set you up with a new life, a new identity, anywhere you want to go. You will never have to worry about money or safety again. You will owe me nothing." This was the ultimate test, the final, crucial piece of his character revealed. He was not replacing one cage with another. He was kicking down the door and showing her an open world. He was giving her the one thing Marcus had stolen from her, a choice. Elara looked at him, at his strong, handsome profile illuminated by the firelight, at the man who had seen through her mask and waged a war on her behalf. She thought of the empty freedom he was offering, a life of quiet anonymity in some distant city alone. Then she thought of the life that was humming with dangerous, vibrant energy right here, in this room, beside this man. A life where she would never have to pretend again. A life where her fire would be not just tolerated, but celebrated. The choice was not a choice at all. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm. His muscles tensed under her touch. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes searching hers, waiting. "And what if I don't want to go anywhere?" she asked, her voice soft but firm, a tremor of newfound strength running through it. "What if I've finally found where I belong?" A slow, possessive smile spread across Dante's face. It transformed his harsh features, making him breathtakingly handsome. It was the smile of a king who had just found his queen. He leaned in, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with a reverence that made her tremble. "Then," he murmured, his lips just a breath from hers, "we build our kingdom together." In the days that followed, Elara witnessed the full, terrifying extent of Dante's power. News of Marcus Sterling's downfall was a media firestorm. It began with whispers of financial irregularities, then escalated to a full-blown scandal as federal investigators, tipped off by a series of meticulously documented anonymous leaks, raided his offices. His business partners deserted him, his political allies distanced themselves, and his pristine public image was systematically dismantled, revealing the corrupt, abusive man beneath. He was arrested, his face pale and stunned in the paparazzi photos, a king dethroned and bewildered. Dante orchestrated it all from the quiet command center of his home office, his phone calls brief and his orders precise. He never raised his voice, never showed any emotion other than a cold, satisfied finality. He was not just destroying a man, he was erasing him. During this time, he treated Elara with a profound and gentle respect. He gave her space to process the seismic changes in her life, to heal from the years of emotional attrition. The house in the hills became her sanctuary. She slept in a luxurious guest suite, a room with a view that made her feel as if she were floating above the world. She explored the house and its grounds, rediscovering the simple pleasure of walking without looking over her shoulder. She began to eat again, not just for sustenance, but with enjoyment. The color returned to her cheeks, the constant tension in her shoulders eased, and the haunted look in her eyes was slowly replaced by a cautious, luminous curiosity. Dante was a constant, steady presence. They ate meals together, talked for hours into the night, and a deep, unspoken bond formed between them. He learned about the woman she had been before Marcus, an intelligent, passionate art history major with a love for Renaissance poetry. She learned about the man behind the ruthless CEO and mafia boss, a man with a fierce loyalty to his inner circle, a surprising appreciation for classical music, and a quiet, profound loneliness that mirrored her own. He never pushed her, never demanded anything from her. He waited. He was letting her choose the pace, letting her reclaim her own agency. The intimacy between them grew not in grand, romantic gestures, but in small, meaningful moments. The way he would bring her a cup of tea, remembering exactly how she liked it. The way his eyes would follow her as she walked through a room, a look of undisguised admiration and possession on his face. The way he would listen, truly listen, when she spoke, making her feel as though her words were the most important thing in the world. He was showing her, through his actions, what it meant to be cherished rather than owned. The physical tension between them was a constant, thrumming undercurrent, a live wire that sparked whenever they were close. But he held back, a gesture of respect that was more seductive than any forward advance could ever have been. He was waiting for her to be ready, to be whole, to come to him not as a refugee seeking shelter, but as an equal choosing her partner. The final piece of her old life fell away a week after her escape. Dante entered the living room where she was reading, a grim expression on his face. He held a tablet out to her. The news headline was stark. Disgraced magnate Marcus Sterling found dead in holding cell. Apparent suicide. Alara stared at the screen, a wave of complex, conflicting emotions washing over her. There was no grief, but there was no triumph either. There was only a profound sense of closure, the final, definitive turning of a dark page. She felt a quiet, hollow emptiness where a decade of fear had lived. She looked up at Dante, her eyes questioning. His expression was impassive, but she knew. A man like Marcus, a narcissist obsessed with control, would not take his own life. He would fight, he would scheme, he would blame everyone but himself until the very end. The official report will be conclusive, Dante said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He chose an easy way out. The world will forget him. He had not just ruined Marcus. He had ensured he could never be a threat to her again, not even a memory that could haunt her from a prison cell. He had wiped the slate clean with a ruthless, final stroke. The last chain holding her to her past had been broken. That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The chapter of Marcus Sterling was closed. A new one was beginning. After dinner, as they stood by the vast windows overlooking the city, Alara turned to him. The time for waiting was over. She had healed enough. She was ready. "You gave me a choice, Dante," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You offered me a new life, anywhere in the world, an escape." "I did," he confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "The offer still stands. You are free, Alara, truly free." "I know," she said. She took a step closer, rising up on her toes to press a soft, tentative kiss to his lips. It was a simple, gentle gesture, but it was electric. A spark that ignited the slow-burning fire that had been building between them for weeks. He froze for a second, surprised by her boldness. Then his body responded with an instinctual possessiveness. His arms came around her, pulling her flush against his hard frame, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that was no longer tentative. It was a kiss of hunger, of pent-up longing, of a king claiming his queen. It was raw and passionate, a clash of two powerful souls who had finally found their counterpart. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes dark with an emotion so fierce it made her heart ache. "My choice is you," she whispered, her hands coming up to frame his face. "My choice is here, with you, not because I am grateful or because I feel I owe you, but because with you I am not hiding. With you I feel more myself than I have in my entire life." A deep, shuddering sigh escaped him, the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for a long time. "Alara!" He murmured her name like a prayer. He swept her up into his arms, his movements fluid and sure, and carried her from the living room, through the quiet house, and into his bedroom. It was a vast, minimalist space, dominated by a large bed and another wall of glass that looked out onto the endless night and the sea of city lights. He laid her gently on the bed, and what followed was not an act of possession, but of worship. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands and lips mapping every inch of her body, learning her and memorizing her. He showed her that intimacy could be a form of communication, a language of touch and breath and shared vulnerability. He was a dominant, powerful man, but with her, he was tender, attentive, his only goal her pleasure, her release. He was not taking, he was giving. He was showing her the devotion he had promised, proving that his protection was not a cage, but a throne from which she would reign beside him. In his arms, Alara was not saved. She was reborn. She met his passion with her own, her banked fires roaring to life, a wild, joyful conflagration that consumed the last vestiges of the cold, frightened woman she had been forced to become. They came together not as a savior and a victim, but as two equals, two sovereigns, finally united in their own, newly formed kingdom. The morning light streamed through the wall of windows, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow. Alara woke slowly, tangled in the sheets and in Dante's arms. He was already awake, watching her, a soft, possessive smile on his lips. The harsh lines of his face were gentler in the morning light, the ruthless CEO and mafia boss momentarily gone, replaced by the man who had looked at her and seen a queen. She felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling so foreign and so welcome it brought tears to her eyes. This was not the end of a rescue, it was the beginning of a life, her life, their life. She reached up and traced the faint scar on his eyebrow, her touch gentle. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning, Mia Regina," he murmured, his voice a low, contented rumble. "My queen." He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the promises of the night and the certainty of the future. He pulled back and looked at her, his expression serious. "There will be challenges," he said. "My world is not a simple one. It can be dangerous." "I'm not afraid," she replied, and she knew with absolute certainty that it was true. She had faced the worst kind of danger, the slow, insidious death of the soul in a cage of quiet misery. The dangers of his world, a world of loyalty, power, and clearly defined enemies, seemed clean and honest in comparison. "I will not be the fragile wife you have to hide away and protect. I will stand beside you." His eyes darkened with pride and a fierce, burning love. He took her hand, the one that had once borne Marcus's ring, and brought it to his lips, kissing her bare finger. "I never for a moment thought you would be anything less," he said. Later, they stood on the balcony, wrapped in robes, holding cups of coffee and watching the city awaken below them. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Dante's arm was a solid, reassuring weight around her shoulders, her body pressed against his side. It felt right. It felt like home. She was no longer Alara Sterling, the perfect, broken trophy wife. She was not a project, not a possession, not a rescued damsel. She was Alara, and she had chosen her own destiny. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged anew. She looked out at the sprawling city, not as a map of places she was forbidden to go, but as a kingdom of infinite possibilities. Their kingdom. Dante followed her gaze, his hand tightening around her in a gesture of shared ownership, of partnership. The elevator had been a prison, a golden box where her old life had died, but it had also been a crucible. It was where a king had recognized his queen, and where a woman who had forgotten her own strength was finally reminded of who she was meant to be. And here, in the dawn of their new world, standing beside him, she was finally, completely, and gloriously free.